Okay, well, let's turn our Bibles to Psalms, please. Proverbs chapter 24. Proverbs chapter 24. When you find your place, we'll stand for the reading of God's Word, and we will read the remainder of the chapter. Proverbs chapter 24. And we'll pick it up in verse 24 through 34. I'll read if you'd follow along. He that saith unto the wicked, Thou art righteous, him shall the people curse. Nations shall abhor him. But to him that rebuke him shall be delight, and a good blessing shall come upon them. Every man shall kiss his lips that giveth a right answer. Prepare thy work without, and make it fit for thyself in the field, and afterwards build thine house. Be not witness against thy neighbor without cause, and deceive not with thy lips. Say not, I will do so to him as he hath done to me. I will render to the man according to his work. I went by the field of the slothful, and by the vineyard of the man void of understanding, and lo, it was all grown over with thorns, and nettles had covered the face thereof, and the stone wall thereof was broken down. Then I saw and considered it well. I looked upon it and received instruction. Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall thy poverty come as one that traveleth, and thy want as an armed man. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, we come before you and we think of this passage here that we just read. It's got a number of different thoughts. We pray that we would be the ones that give the right answer, that we would not call good evil and evil good. Lord, that we would prepare our work in the field first, that we'd be very diligent in our preparations. And then as we think about diligence in our work, whatever it might be, whether it be ministry, whether it be the upkeep of our home, whether it be our job, that we would show due diligence to it. We ask this all now in Jesus' name. Amen. I think you may be seated. So we're picking up here in verse 24. We did talk about, verse 23, and we referenced James chapter 2. As we pick it up in verse 24, he that saith unto the wicked, Thou art righteous, him shall the people curse. Nations shall abhor him. I'm not sure if I got into this last week, but just to mention, I think of some of our world leaders that rub shoulders with wicked leaders, and sometimes they say nothing. Sometimes they even praise those people. And they would say to us, well, there's so much more at stake. There's the trade deals that we have with those nations. I think of our prime minister who has, in times past, said good things about dictators, such as Fidel Castro. And we need to take a stand against wickedness and not condone it. I think of the famous basketball player, and I'm not at all lifting up him or sportsmen in general, but and this basketball player and wrestler Dennis Rodman, who has been friends of the dictator Kim Jong-un from North Korea, and he has called him a friend for life. Yet Kim Jong-un is a wicked man. Love to see him get saved. And we should be praying towards that end. But he has done great wickedness. Dennis Rodman even spoke out against the case of the Christian pastor Kenneth Bay, implying, because Kenneth Bay was arrested. And, I think if I recall right, it was on charges of spying or something like that. And yet he was in, subversion, that kind of thing. And, I don't get some of these communist countries that imprison Christian leaders. Because Christian leaders, on the whole, are teaching their subjects, or not subjects, but are teaching the the Christians of that nation to be the best citizens they can be. And it's not about subversion. It's not about rising up against the evil dictator. They try to. The focus is on salvation and how to live the Christian life under the conditions that they're going through. So it really mystifies me. But this basketball player, Dennis Rodman, even spoke out against Bay, implying that he had done some deeds that were, worthy of imprisonment. Saying stuff like, "Do you actually know what he did?" Raising questions. Well, what did he do? So when we read here in verse 24, "He that saith unto the wicked, Thou art righteous, him shall the people curse." And so we are not to bless the wicked in that way and call them good. We can certainly still, bless those that curse us, yes, but we don't call them good. We don't say that their deeds are good. Verse 25, "But to them that rebuke him shall be delight, and a good blessing shall come upon them. Every man shall kiss his lips that giveth a right answer." It takes a lot of prayerful consideration as far as what to say sometimes about these wicked people, whether they be leaders or otherwise. And so it's not something just to spout off and to malign them, but there is a time and place to speak out against evil. And those that there will be a good sector of the population that will appreciate it when we say the right things, give the right answer, as we see in verse 26. Now let's pick it up in verse 27. "Prepare thy work without, and make it fit for thyself in the field, and afterward build thy house." So often quite often people are optimistic. I know I'm that way sometimes. And you jump right into something without taking the proper steps to prepare it. Just reading right now this book called Answers to Prayer, excerpts from George Mueller's diary, and just about all the prayer that went into starting the orphanages and the schools that he started. A lot of prayer went into it. He didn't just jump in and say, "Okay, I'm going to do this." He prayed about it. He got peace. He then put out a news release saying that this is what he was going to do. He didn't ask for money, but he's just making it known because he needed to have people that would come to it. It was kind of funny because he opened up his doors, and yet he was like, "I don't have any applications. Nobody has applied to come to our orphanage." And then he started wondering, well, is anybody coming? And certainly enough, as time went, people started coming, and they were filled up. But just the principle of preparing ahead. You could take a look at, just give me one moment here. 1 Kings chapter 5. We'll read verses 13 through 18. So we've got the building of the temple. And we'll see some of the forethought that Solomon went into. And of course, you could even go back before that, and you could look at the forethought that David went into. I mean, David was rearing to go and build the temple, and Nathan said, "Oh, yes." Nathan optimistically said, well, of course. God would want you to build a temple. That is a noble thing to do. And it was. And Nathan jumped the gun there because he just assumed that, well, why would God say no to that? But God had other plans. So God still allowed David to collect a lot of the supplies. And then we see in verse 13 here that of 1 Kings chapter 5, Solomon now taking it to the next level. And King Solomon raised a levy out of all Israel. And the levy was 30,000 men. And he sent them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month by courses. A month they were in Lebanon, and 2 months at home. And Adoniram was over the levy. And Solomon had 70,000 that bare burdens, and 80,000 hewers in the mountains. Beside the chief of the Solomon's officers, which were over the work, 3,300, which ruled over the people that wrought in the work. And the king commanded, and they brought great stones, costly stones, and huge stones to lay the foundations of the house. And Solomon's builders and Hiram's builders did hew them, and the stone corners. So they prepared timber and stones to build the house. Well, that's quite the rotation, isn't it? When you think about work rotations, some people, they work a 4 on, 4 off. Some work a week on, a week off, or a month on, a month off. And here is Solomon. His men are working a month on, 2 months off. It's very possible that travel time might have been in those 2 months off, but that's still pretty good. But you notice here how prepared he was. And of course, as you read later on that in other passages, that everything was prepared. So that all they had to do is just bring the materials and set them in order. It wasn't the sound of a hammer banging around, and it was just all pre-done and popped into place. Let's take a look at some of the words of Christ in Luke 14. Luke 14. Just because something is a great idea, a noble endeavor, or even something that the Lord would have us do, doesn't mean that we jump into it with both feet without first preparing the work. So Luke chapter 14, verse 28. For which of you intending to build a tower sitteth not down first and counteth the cost, whether he have sufficient to finish it? Lest haply, after he hath laid the foundation and is not able to finish it, all that behold it begin to mock him, saying, This man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king going to make war against another king sitteth not down first, and consulteth whether he be able with 10,000 to meet him that cometh with 20,000? Or else while the other is yet a great way off, he sendeth an embassage, and desireth conditions of peace. So likewise, whosoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple. This is an illustration that bears a really good truth here. We'll hold the truth just for a moment, but notice here how he speaks about preparing. And, I think about when we built our church our church building back at Victory Baptist in Sherwood Park, how we were saving for so long. And we met in Pastor Harness's house for a number of years. We were meeting in the garage, which had been kind of built. It had been renovated to be a part of the house. It was no longer a garage. You wouldn't have expect it didn't have the look of a garage at all. But we turned it into a place to meet. Now it was the homeschool quarters Monday through Saturday, and it was the part of the family room during that time. But come Sunday and Wednesday night, it was the church house while we saved and saved and saved. And then the time came to actually start. We didn't have all the money yet, but we had faith that the Lord would provide. So we began that we had enough to get a good halfway into the project. And we had the faith that the Lord was leading to start. And so we started. And there was never a point in time that we had to stop and wait for the money to come. It was there. I think of even years ago, 10 years ago, when we re-shingled the roof of the church here. We didn't have the money to do the whole project. And we looked at a few options. Well, should we buy all the shingles and roof the one side, and then the next year pay for labor to roof the other side? Of course, we'd have to replace the very top ridge line on the second time round. But we were looking at it and praying about it, and then the Lord started to bring the money in, and then we had peace to go about doing it. And we had more than enough. And even when we ran into some problems and had to resheet it because of dry rot, the Lord provided the extra money Not a problem. And the Lord does that. But so there is a combination of preparing, but also even stepping out in faith, where you're not waiting until, okay, well, we still short $5. We're not touching this project until we get that last $5 in. The Lord doesn't always lead that way, but you know, there is the need to prepare and the need to step out in faith. Notice also in that text there, in Luke 14, the greater truth. So likewise, whosoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple. Jesus is saying here, you got to count the cost. You have to know what is in the life, what you'll be experiencing in the life of the believer. You've got to decide whether you're going to be my disciple. And it is so important when we're giving the gospel that we give the whole gospel, that we don't make it sound like, you just say a prayer, keep living the same way you are, and we'll see you in heaven. But rather that we give the gospel, we tell what it means to be a Christian. We speak on, some of the hardships, but also the blessings of the Christian life, and let that person make a informed decision so that they know what to expect. Even still, you'll get people that will want to get saved, and they have not yet really put two and two together. You think about Pliable in the story of Pilgrim's Progress, and he's hearing about some of these things that Christians telling him, and he keeps asking for all the good, the nice things, and he doesn't want to hear the nasty things. But then when that first trial comes, the slough of despond, he's like, let me out of here. So in the Christian life, there is a need to plan ahead, but also to live by faith. I came across this story of David Livingstone. I don't think I've mentioned the story before, but if I have, you'll have to forgive me. He was sending letters back and forth with his missionary agency, and this missionary agency they asked him, have you found a good road to get into the interior of Africa? Because if you have, we want to send you some missionaries. And Livingstone reportedly replied that if those missionaries needed a nice, safe road to travel down, they were not the type of missionaries he needed. He needed missionaries that could make a road where there was no road. And so, there is the aspect of living by faith and preparing. It goes hand in hand. Okay, let's go back into our text here. So prepare thy work without, and make it fit for thyself in the field, and afterwards build thine house. Be diligent in preparing. That's why when a church starts a new ministry, there's got to be a ministry goal. What is the purpose of this ministry? Who is this ministry to reach? Who's going to be in this ministry? We've talked before, about the possibility of starting a Reformers Unanimous. We've talked about some plans to enhance our children's ministries and great things to do, but until the Lord opens those doors, until he makes provision in some of these situations, it has to do with a lack of space to hold the necessary activities. So there's that preparation that goes into it beforehand. Okay, now verse 28. Be not witness against thy neighbor without cause, and deceive not with thy lips. Now, to be so careful that we do not raise a false accusation against somebody, that we speak only on what we know to be true, and in some cases, as you know, there'll be times where people will raise they'll they'll lie through their teeth, as the saying goes. They have total disregard for the truth, and they'll raise up a railing accusation. And what's the purpose? They have a motive. They have something to gain. And it might even just be simply that they hate that person, and they want to destroy them, do what they can to destroy them. So be not witness against thy neighbor, and it just doesn't necessarily mean, your physical neighbor across the street, but those we come in contact with. But then there are the times when, because you notice there, without cause. So, of course, there are times when we have to bear witness against that person. But we are not to deceive with our lips, not to color the truth, not to change the truth, not to add to the truth, but just to speak the truth. And say not, I will do to him as he hath done to me, I'll render it to the man according to his work. Well, Christ was railed upon, and he railed not back. So that's our modus operandum. We don't reply against them. We do not render to them according to their works. Now notice in verse 30, this account here, I went by the field of the slothful, and by the vineyard of the man void of understanding. And lo, it was all grown over with thorns, and nettles had covered the face thereof, and the stone wall thereof was broken down. Then I saw and considered it well. I looked upon it and received instruction. Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding the hands to sleep. So shall thy poverty come as one that traveleth, and thy want as an armed man. Here we look at being diligent in our work. Earlier in the passage in verse 27, we read about preparing our work. And there's a diligence that goes into that. But now there's actually where your feet are on the ground and you're doing it. This goes beyond just the preparation. And so here Solomon is given this observation. He says, I went by the field of the slothful, by the vineyard of the man void of understanding. And he describes how it's just overgrown with thorns. Nettles covered the face thereof. The stone wall thereof was broken. And he talks about a little sleep, a little slumber. And how people love their ease. We do love our ease as a whole. There are some that just thrive on work. But then there are some that don't. Many of us don't. Many of us, it's like, okay, I got to get that job done. Yesterday when we were on visitation, I was happy to see this older gentleman just going away at his yard, weed eater and pushing his lawnmower. And on one hand, I wish he wasn't, because that would have maybe given me an opportunity to witness to him. But he was pointing to put the John Romans in at the house there, and as he went by on his mower. When we think about the whole thing of a little sleep, a little slumber, you got to be careful in how much we sleep, when we sleep. Sometimes a person gets carried away with doing things late into the evening, into the wee hours of the night. Someone was just recently telling me about a relative of theirs that would watches movies into the and sometimes goes to bed at 4 or 5 in the morning. And then, of course, their rhythms are so messed up. And maybe they're supposed to be at work at 8 o'clock. And they get to work at 8:15, 8:30. And they're just like dragging. And there's things like, there's research that shows that using computers, watching television, into the evening affects our ability to even fall asleep. So you might go to bed at 10 o'clock, but you might lay awake and stare at the ceiling because you've gotten the blue light, as they from the different devices, mobile devices, and it affects our sleep. And of course we go through seasons as well. I went through a season here some months back where I was consistently waking up at 5 a.m. without my alarm clock. And I actually enjoyed that. In the last little while, it's been like, oh, it's time to get up. I don't like that. I don't like that. It's just one of those seasons you go through. Maybe it's the heat, an adjustment, or more exercise. I did 8.3 kilometers yesterday, both going on visitation and also then took the kids for a bicycle ride up Schubert Drive there yesterday. Some of these things can affect our energy levels. But a thought to think on as we think about being diligent in our work is sometimes there are things that we need to cut out. Like, for instance, I'll give you an example. I don't necessarily want to do this. My wife wants to do this. We're still negotiating. But, there are times when, like, for instance, we've got these 2 grapevines. And they take some upkeep, right? There's, you got to prune them, and you got to get rid of the clippings and take them to Cinnamon Ridge. And my wife is like, why don't we go from 2 to 1? Get rid of the one vine and just keep the one. And sometimes you do things like that, and you reduce your workload. Like, do you really need that? Well, I say yes, we do, but I love grape jelly, so just like in our back here, where we graveled over the scrub grass that was at the back of our fence. Did the grass and weeds improve the look of our house and our property? No. Did they increase our work? Yes. By taking them out and putting gravel over top, they made the place look a lot nicer and reduced the work. So sometimes we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot by giving ourselves unnecessary work, things that we don't need to do. Then, of course, then there's just the aspect of being diligent. In our climate here in Kamloops, we think about how it gets warm, doesn't it, during the summer, and we're starting to get into that season. And so being able to get up early, get outside, do the things you need to do outside, or perhaps in the evening, use kind of working with the temperature so that we optimize our labors. Just give me a second here. And so, of course, this goes to all areas of life, both our work around our home, keeping it up so it doesn't fall down around us. And quite often it's very simple. It might be caulking a windowsill so that water doesn't come in and wreck your windows. And I had that in Sherwood Park. I've mentioned before, I had no idea that it would do that. A little bit of paint, chips and peels, and you're like, oh yeah, I should get to that. And then before you know it, you've got dry rot. And now you have to take out wood. You might even have to put in new windows, whatever. Taking care of simple things can keep from a lot of headache down the road. Goes for the maintenance on vehicles. Simple things like oil changes. Changing your air filter or blowing it out, or just even, bang it against a fence to get the dust out so that your engine can run properly, doesn't get all plugged up. There's diligence in the way of our work environment. When we go, those that have jobs, you go to work and you find certain areas where you can cut corners that shouldn't be cut. They weren't meant to be cut. And I know Jeremy's in carpentry. Probably he's thinking about different corners that he has to cut. But I'm speaking. I'm talking about where you do something kind of improperly, or you do only half-heartedly, or you say someone else will do it. In my work in 911 dispatch, there are times when it's like, okay, so we've got the ambulance going. Do we need the fire department on this call? Do we need a road rescue group in this call? Do we need search and rescue? And the work is kind of divided up, but sometimes you look and you go, I don't see any notes about search and rescue being called. And you speak to the person that took the call. Has search and rescue been called? No, it hasn't yet. or I forgot, or whatever it is. And we have these we work together so that we don't drop the ball, and you get those things done. And so just being very careful and diligent. Sometimes, in this career, you can go, well, there's another call. You can see it lit up on the board that there's another call coming in, and you're like, I need to drop this, finish this task, and move on to the next. And you forget something critical, being diligent. The scripture talks in Colossians about not being men pleasers, where we're just looking for the praise of men, and we're just doing what is enough. I heard one man tell me, he said, you have to know what your boss is looking for and just kind of do those things. And it's more than that. It's doing what this boss, our heavenly boss, wants done. And if we do what our heavenly boss wants done, believe me, your earthly manager, supervisor is going to be very pleased with your work. If we work as unto the Lord and not just for the praise of men, our earthly supervisors, managers, and hopefully colleagues will be very pleased with what we do. So let's not be like this man, the slothful man, void of understanding. His place is grown over with thorns and nettles. The stone wall is broken down. And we can, just like Solomon, we can look at those things, and as he did in verse 32, we can take instruction from it. Not to go and just look down upon that person, but to say, okay, that's what happens when you're not diligent in your work. And it's a case in point to show our children. Look, that's what happens when you're not diligent in keeping up with things. Okay, and we see the result is that poverty cometh. Because give an example of a car, right? If we go and we run a car for too long without doing the oil change, we blow the engine, and now we've got $3,000 bill coming our way. And we're like, oh, woe was me. If we had done the oil change, or whatever it was that was necessary, we wouldn't have that big bill, would we? So just being diligent.